ceremony that he made with Abraham. In Genesis 15, starting in verse 4, I know I told you Exodus 3, so I'll go ahead and read this one to you if you want to stay there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. We're speaking of Eleazar of Damascus here. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. And this covenant was reiterated to his son in chapter 26 to Isaac, and then again in chapter 28 to Jacob. But back in chapter 15, verse 7, I will give you this land to possess, is the only part of that promise that had not yet quite been fulfilled. At this point in Exodus, at least. The time span between Abraham, when this promise was given, to Moses is about 600 years. But let's see. And then last week we spoke about the birth of Moses. In Corey's class on Israel's suffering in Egypt, we talked about Moses' early life. That's that first 40 years. And if you'll remember, Corey mentioned that there's 3 different 40-year time frames that you can divide Moses' life into. First 40 years he was in Egypt. Second 40 he was off in Midian. And then the last 40 he was in the wilderness. Moses was born into Levites. He had a Levite mother and father. And then he was sent down a river in a raft covered in pitch. And if you'll remember from 2 weeks ago when we talked about Noah's Ark, that pitch that lined the inside and the outside of the ark was the same way that his little basket was made before he floated down the river. And that word pitch in the Hebrew, the root word for that is the same word for salvation. So that same pitch that kept the ark afloat and kept Moses afloat on the river was their own salvation. When Moses fled from Egypt off to Midian, this is about how far away that was. Little over, almost 500 kilometers. To put it in perspective, it's like from here to the other end of Plainview or Lubbock. Do it about 7 hours in the car. Or if you want to stay a little closer, if you were to walk out to Abilene and back, that's about how far he fled after he killed the Egyptian. So those first 40 years in Egypt, he killed an Egyptian, ran away to Midian, then he got married to the daughter of a priest. He had sons, and then 40 years later, God called him. At this point, he is 80 years old. And we pick up right here in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. This is one of those theophanies we talked about a couple weeks ago. Out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And the Lord saw that he turned aside to see. God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, but take your sandals off your feet, for the place which you are standing is holy ground. And I always thought that was interesting. Why do you take your sandals off when it's holy ground? And there's this thing called grounding where apparently it's good for your body to go stand just out in the grass even today without any shoes on. But for this in particular, I think it was more than symbolic, but symbolically, you're not tracking in the dirt of the world into the holy land, that dirt that represents sin. You're not bringing the sin into holy ground in the presence of God. And it's to show reverence and respect for the Lord that you were in front of. Picking up in verse 6, and he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And we see that parallel as well, like Adam and Eve, when they hid in the garden, this initial reaction, fear, and trying to hide. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So here it is, 600 years later. God made a promise, and he's following through on it. We know that God is not slow as some count slowness. And yet here we are, 600 years. How many people knew of this call, this promise, and were wondering for the last 600 years? 400 of it at least was in Egypt, bondage. They were persecuted. They were attempted to be oppressed, and yet they multiplied all the more for it. But God heard his people's cries from within Egypt, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham. God called Moses. Now, we are called ourselves today, but we'll have to talk about something that's called descriptive versus prescriptive, because there's lots of things in the Bible. A lot of it's descriptive, and a lot of it's prescriptive. Descriptive calling shows the ways that God has historically called his people. Now, prescriptive or normative things are what's in the Bible that applies to all of us. Is there anything y'all can think of that might be descriptive or prescriptive? Y'all got any ideas on that? It's okay if you don't, because I listed out a few. And these differences is what causes a lot of problems in the world today between Christians. Now, what is descriptive or prescriptive? What's a salvation issue? And what is purposefully vague and open to interpretation? There's a couple of things that I put together. Women covering their hair, men cutting their hair after a vow, church leadership, overseers, elders, deacons, preachers, stuff like that. You've got polygamy in the Old Testament, or meeting in homes of the early church. And then the style of judgment, that's a pretty good one too, that's descriptive. But our prescriptive, things that are prescribed for all of us to do, have faith. Were you raising your hand? No? Okay, I will call on you. It's my wife. I'm allowed to pick on her. I will call on you. You got to confess Jesus is Lord, the Son of God. You got to be baptized. You have to have love. That's one I think that a lot of people overlook. I'm not calling anyone out, but I see it in the world. Loss of love. And then the church leadership, all of the positions, elders and deacons and all that. But one thing I thought was interesting we don't really see is the position of a dedicated pulpit minister. There are preachers, but everyone who's qualified to teach is called to preach. So it's interesting. Now, some claim that descriptive stories apply to themselves today as prescriptions from God. And I've seen, some of these that are listed on the descriptive side, people trying to claim, well, God said it was in the Bible, that means we can do it. And that includes polygamy. There's still people trying to claim that today. The early church meeting in homes, there's nothing wrong with that. We can meet in our homes. A lot of people do small groups and stuff like that. But the way that God dished out judgment, now imagine if everyone who offered a strange fire was struck down like Nadab and Abihu, or if everyone who told a lie fell down dead like Ananias and Sapphira. Man. We must be careful in attributing these descriptive things to the prescriptive in our lives. God called Noah, he called Abraham, he called Moses and Aaron, and every, what you could call the main characters in the Bible. They were called directly and specifically. But there was a whole nation of Israel, millions of people by some estimates. Well, actually, they count them up, and there were millions of men, and that doesn't even really account all of their women and all of the children and everyone who was below fighting age. So you could probably double the actual numbers that we get in the rest of the Pentateuch here. But they weren't called to be anything other than God's chosen people. There's no calling language throughout the rest of the Old Testament that would have made the original audience, the Israelites in the wilderness, think that they needed to be looking for a special call from God. There was no something they were looking for. A lot of people will look for a call today. What am I supposed to do with my life? How am I supposed to figure this out? In what area am I called to serve God? And this could be maybe a little ironic coming from me, because my wife and I, as you will see, we've got a little video after services today for Mission Sunday. We are going to be missionaries. But, I didn't hear any voice in my head saying, Liam, go to the land of Japan, preach the word. So how do we get to this point? How do we get to be called? Or how do we know that God has called us to a certain way? Personally, we've been praying for the last 2 years that if we're going to do more harm than good over there in Japan, that we pray for God not to let it work out. And there are so many steps and moving pieces and things that have to line up to get on a religious works visa in a country that doesn't recognize most religions. And I say recognize, they don't believe in any of it, really. And yet, the more we have patience and faith in God and let him control things, the easier and quicker and the more doors have been opening for us. Now, whether or not that's still me misinterpreting the signs that we're called to go this direction, we could look back in 40 more years and say, yeah, he was teaching us a different lesson. But for right now, we're just going to keep moving forward towards this direction, because it seems like there is a space for us to go and work there. We took the time, we looked for the need, we were invited. You want to talk about the divine hand of God making all of our paths straight. It certainly seems like he has his hand in all of it. We know he's got his hand in everything, but as far as calls go, it does seem like we are being called this direction. Do y'all have any ideas on how God might call you? I know a lot of people here are in service to the Lord. Do y'all have any personal thoughts or opinions on how you were called into service? Neil, calling on you. No, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but you are in the service. What you got?
I know the old-time preachers used to say that they didn't preach because they wanted to. They preached because they had to.
That's right. They didn't preach because they wanted to. They preached because they had to. Mm-hmm. That's true. I'm not getting paid to stand here right now. And honestly, when the alarm went off this morning, I was like, wow, I wish it was another day that I could sleep in right now. But I just try to tell myself that you all are happier to not be up here instead of me than you are upset at me being up here. So hopefully that's true. And you're not more upset at me being up here. I laid out a couple of verses. You're right, we are all called. And I do love being up here. But every day I wake up, I don't want to be up here for my own selfish reasons. I want to be up here because I want to serve the Lord, and that's what we're all called to do. We're called to serve. And the best way to find where you're needed personally is to open up your ears. We tell our daughter, she's 4.5, and when she's not listening, we say, turn your ears on. So if you turn your ears on and listen, there's work that needs to be done. There's people that need help. There's others that you can serve, and the call is constant for us. Here's a couple of verses I put together. Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. We've also got 1 Corinthians chapter 10:31, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. So we're not all prescribed to be church leadership or teachers. In fact, James 3 tells us very clearly that not everybody should be teachers. And hopefully you all don't think that applies to me after we're done here. But it is true. That verse exists, and that means there are some that are not qualified. Are you here to question my qualifications? All right, what you got?
I was just going to say, like I think about my own situation. When I was pretty small, I didn't know if I wanted to do any kind of like ministry, quote unquote. But that was, I had a whole different career path that I was going to do. But I think that was part of it. Is sometimes those, I think, when we look back historically in the church that have like done the most good, oftentimes they just knew they wanted to serve God. They didn't have, oh, this I want to be my career. It became their career.
Yep.
But it's just a matter of, the calling or whatever was just, I want to do my best, and they found out, hey, I can be effective at this.
That's don't steal that from me, all right? Because I was going to write a sermon on qualifications for those who serve God, and I'm going to do that very soon. But you're right. Not only did they not see themselves when they were called all throughout the Bible, those ones especially that were called specifically, they refused. And we'll look at Moses here in a minute and his refusals. And then, they ended up being recorded in the Hall of Faith there in Hebrews. Crazy. God knows what he's doing, believe it or not. And, all right, I'll give you all a little sneak peek at the sermon. It's basically going to boil down to this. If you feel unqualified, that might be true. But everyone that he was called, especially Moses, thought they were also unqualified. And that's a good thing, unless it's true that you shouldn't be in the pulpit, you know what I mean? But that's not what we're talking about. If you are unqualified, or feel you are, you think you are yourself, that's good. Because in our weakness is where God and his strength shines through. That's the end. That's the end of that sermon there. So I can't give that one here now, because I got to preach here in 2 weeks, so I got to write a different sermon for that Sunday. But y'all will know that's the answer that comes through from the wherever else I end up preaching that one. And then I also got the greatest command in Matthew 22, which is, of course, first you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And that's the great and the first commandment. And the second is like this: love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments stands the law and the prophets that got cut off. The Bible is full of ways that we are called to act. And you can't really boil it down. I mean, yeah, we can put it here in a couple slides. But as far as the specifics, the little nitty-gritty, it's throughout the whole Bible. And now I know this is the Bible twice over. This is in 2 different languages, but it's a big book. So we've got to study it every day to be getting good at this. All right, so we got to the excuses. Let's talk about the excuses of Moses. Picking up in chapter 3, verse 11. Anybody have anything else before we get back to reading? I got to remember to look up for hands. All right. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" It's like, well, who are you? You're the one that God called. That's who you are. And God answered, "But I will be with you." That should be good enough right there, right? Verse 14 should be, and Moses was on his way, right? "And this shall be the sign for you." So God not only gave an answer, provided a way for him to know. A confidence booster. "This shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." And then Moses said to God, second attempt, "But if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" Well, yeah, okay, so you told me who I am, but who are you? And it's interesting, again, we see this, what is your name? It's the same thing that Jacob did when he wrestled with the angel of the Lord. And if you were here 2 weeks ago, you'll remember I said that there was something in ancient Egypt, some myth that I couldn't recall correctly, that had something to do with their infatuation with names, the naming of people. So I went and looked it up. And it is the story, it's an Egyptian myth between Ra, the sun god, and Isis, the goddess of magic. And basically, nobody knew the secret name of Ra, because if you knew it, you would suddenly have all of his power. Doesn't make sense to us, I know, but this is what they believed. So it was the same time frame around when these stories were taking place several thousand years ago in ancient Egypt. So maybe that had some influence as to why they kept asking, what is your name? Trying to figure out, God is there in front of them, and they just want to know, well, what's your name? What do we call you? And we know one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not take the name of God in vain. And we often attribute that to saying, "Oh my God." And all throughout I was growing up, you better not say that. You can't take the name of the Lord in vain. But his name isn't God. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's a title. God with a capital G, and sometimes we will refer to the entire Trinity, the whole Godhead, as being God with a capital G. And anything else, like Isis and Ra here, these are lowercase g's, and we do that to show reverence and respect for God. Nothing wrong with that, that's okay. But the ancient Israelites and the early scribes and all that took it a little step further. With the rest of this story, the goddess of magic there devised some plan where she had a snake bit Ra, and he was going to die because lowercase g gods can die, apparently. And the only way that she could help him is if he told her his name, and then she would use that magic to heal him. So if he's got that magic, I don't know why he couldn't just heal himself. Makes no sense. But, myths aren't really supposed to make sense, I don't think. That's why they're myths. So God answered again, back in chapter 3, "I am who I am." Now, I took Greek in my schooling. I didn't take Hebrew, but I have it on pretty good authority that written down there below, "I am who I am," is Hebrew. And it's read from right to left, which is really annoying when you're trying to copy and paste it into a Word document or a PowerPoint slide or anything, because then your cursor starts doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But right there, on the left and the right side there, you'll see what is the Hebrew word for "I am." And this is God's actual name right here. It says in verse 3, "They will listen to your voice." And all throughout the rest here, "I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt, and he will let you go. You won't even go empty. You shall plunder the Egyptians." So not only are they going to listen to you, and Pharaoh is going to let you go, but you're not going to go empty-handed. This is a pretty good promise. And I am who I am. This is where we get the word Yahweh. or the Tetragrammaton, the YHWH, Yod He Vav He, which actually means the Eternal One. It's different from right here. I've got it on this slide here. On the right, you'll see I am, which is Ha-Yah, or something like that, Ha-Yah. And then on the left, this is the Tetragrammaton. This is Yahweh right here. Now, I was wondering, why are they different? God gave himself this name on the right, but we always put the reverence and the respect, and it's a person. It's a difference in person. The one on the left is third person. The one on the right is first person. This one is I am on the right, and on the left, he is, basically, or he will be, and it's a forever aspect here. The Eternal One, the name of God right here. And they being the early scribes, they had an extreme reverence for the personal name of God, going so far as to not even writing it down as they were pinning or making copies. They would just put 4 dots for the YHWH. That's not taking the name of the Lord in vain. Is writing it down taking it in vain? We might say no, but to them, there were so many rules, especially when we get to this type of text you see here with the vowel markings. Those weren't in the original ones. That didn't come in until about 1000 AD with the Masoretes. In the Masoretic text, they added in the vowel markings so that we could actually pronounce it, because YHWH is not pronounceable. And so you might be wondering, well, how do we know what the vowels are supposed to be? Well, context clues for what other words, and people speak this language, so they figured it out, that Yahweh. Another thing they would do is they would take these letters, the Tetragrammaton, and they would put in the vowels for Adonai, which is Hebrew for my Lord, which is why you see Lord in what's called small caps in your Bible. If you'll pay attention to that, when Lord is written, like in chapter 4, verse 4, but the Lord, it's not lowercase. And I bring special attention to this because I knew a man that was in his 40s that never noticed that before, but had read the Bible many times. The Lord, it's in all caps. That's because they've replaced what would be Yahweh right here. But if you take the vowels for Adonai, my Lord, and put it in, you get Yahovah, which was then Germanized into Jehovah. So Jehovah is actually a created word. There's a lot of people that think that's the only word you can use, and there's some Bible translations that only put Jehovah in there. But if you're drawing fine lines where there aren't fine lines, then you need to be careful. All right? Jehovah, it's fine. It's a good word to use. It's not the only word. It's not the only approved word. And it's not even in the original text. All right. Picking up in chapter 4, verse 1, Yahweh, the one who is and will be. Moses' third attempt here, all right, as if the first 2 weren't good enough, right? He says, but Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And the Lord told him, throw it on the ground, and it became a snake. He said, reach out your hand and pick it up, and it became a staff again. Then he told him, put your hand inside your cloak. And when he removed it, it was leprous, white like snow. Now they used leprous, I don't know if it was actually leprosy like we know it, but leprosy was used for any type of skin condition. And he said it was white like snow, and then he commanded him to put it back in his cloak and took it out, and it was fine again. And then he said, if they may believe that the Lord, the God of the fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. And again, the Lord said to him, put it back into your cloak. He took it out. Verse 7, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Verse 8, if they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. There's always this question, right? There's always this question. They didn't even receive Moses the first time, as Corey mentioned last week. They sent him away because who made you Lord and God over us? Sent him away, just like how Jesus was rejected the first time, but they welcomed him the second time. Spoiler alert. If they will not even believe these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. But Moses said to the Lord, fourth attempt, here we go, 4 times, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Do you think that excuse worked for God? No, of course not. God said, who made your mouth? Come on, man. You think I don't know you? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, right? We think we're not qualified. We try to make these excuses. But if you're called to do something, know that God is with you. And then again, one final attempt. 5 attempts in a row. Verse 13, but he said, "Oh, my Lord, please just send someone else." It's like me in bed this morning. Just send someone else. 2 weeks ago, I showed up, and Chris was ready to teach, and he had notes in the same outline I had that I taught from 2 weeks ago, and he was like, "Wait, you're speaking this morning?" I was like, before I could even say, "Well, you can have it." No, he's like, "Oh, you got it. Yeah, you're good. Go ahead, go do it." And I was like, in bed this morning, I was like, I wonder if Chris is ready again this morning. And then, what was God's answer? It took 5 times, all right? Speaks to God's patience. Those of you who have kids, how many times do your kids question you before you lose your cool? For me, it's half of a time. Before the first excuse even gets out, it's like, just listen to me. But here we got Moses, 5 attempts. Send someone else, please. I'm not good. I can't do it. They're not going to listen to me. I'm not qualified. And it's just me. Who am I? It's like, look, God is with you. God's answer with anger and a solution. Verse 14, then the anger of the Lord was kindled. Is this a pun? He is a burning bush right now, right? The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite?" And I imagine here, that scene from Lord of the Rings when Bilbo's like, "You just want the ring for yourself." And he's like, "Bilbo Baggins." I imagine God here. "Moses, I am not a peddler of cheap tricks. I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you here, Moses. Come on." And now Aaron was still back in Egypt, right? Verse 14, behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. Completely solved. Perfect, right? Nothing to worry about. God had a plan this whole time, and if Moses would just stop trying to make an excuse and see, God already knew that all this was going to happen, and he sent his brother. You saw the distance there. It probably took more than 2 weeks to walk that. It takes 8 hours to drive it from Egypt to Midian. God had already prepared because his brother was on the way. So how do we excuse ourselves today? Do we see ourselves in Moses' shoes? What kind of excuses do we make for how God has called us today? Are we unqualified? Are we too scared to get up in the pulpit? Do we fool ourselves into thinking that we would have acted any differently in the presence of the Lord as Moses and the Israelites? Because honestly, reading through the Old Testament, I'm like, would you guys just listen? And I'm sure when I'm being a bonehead out there, not listening or being worried or thinking that the world is ending because of small mishap, misstep, a mistake, I'm sure the Lord is just saying, would you just listen to me? I will be with you. And I came across a little article there in the doom scroll land. It was like top 6 or 7 reasons why miserable people are miserable. And one of them was that they think that it's all over before it's even began. And another one is they think perfection is the prerequisite. And it's not. We are not, and we will never be perfect. But God's grace is sufficient. God is with us. He has made a way and will always make a way like he has had. And your prescriptive promises are go forth in love and faith and service to others. Does anybody have any questions, anything they'd like to add before I flip to the very last slide? Okay, here goes. No coming back after this. All right, next week, you've got to look forward to Corey. He will be back. Moses confronts the Pharaoh. Wonder what's going to happen.